Hello, welcome to Garden Chronicles. My name is James David. Today's video is very much more on a light and easy factor, and I must confess that I have not been gardening for quite some time, at least for a few months, or even I can say roughly about 6 months or so. And one of the do factor here is that I have started to work, and a lot of my time has been absorbed in my work schedule, and by the time I leave in the morning and come back by the night, and sometimes I'm very tired, and therefore I've totally forgotten to care for my plants, except for occasional pruning or watering. Even watering seems to be like once a week kind of factor, and a lot of my plants I've gone through a stage where they require a high maintenance factor, and most of these plants did not do so well, especially those those sensitive types as and and those have sadly perished in my garden due to lack of care and my part of negligence. However, there are others which I find, in a way I can mention that in an experimental factor, where these actually have weathered the storm, in a way to say that in the factor of experiments that most of them that actually survive. In a way I can mention that they are hardy plants. And the other factor here that I want to mention here is that a due factor of now with the factor of availability of time, I'm able to do my gardening more on a therapeutic factor of doing them, repotting, resetting, and checking if at all they need a change of medium and that kind of sorts. And that was duration. In that duration of time, I'm able to take this particular video to show the difference of what I have actually managed to do in my garden space. So in this particular video, I will not talk so much on plant care, rather more on a combination of few tips that I have actually learned, and I'd like to share my thoughts and my experience here together with some plants details which I would like to highlight here. And in a way I can say it's more like a vlog kind of thing, and particularly this is very much on December 2023, and this is more on that context of experiences. This particular one is known as Dracaena sucrosa. It kind of something appears to be more like a bamboo kind of plant, and I'm actually very intrigued about this particular one because I am actually eyeing for the types that has a lot of unique factors. And this particular one of the things is that this is very hardy plant, and coming to a place where lacking much of sunlight. And this particular thing, if you were to notice, that is more on a very shaded garden space, and especially if you were to have something of the kind where you were to have a small tight space garden, especially gardening is quite a challenge, especially when it comes to challenging spaces or lack of which this particular plant seems to do so well. And I want to emphasize this is that this particular one do not require much care, and I think when I'm keeping this for quite some time. However, another downside of it here is that it doesn't really grow very fast. So they're not a vigorous grower, especially this particular type of variegated type. There are many different varieties about it. I have actually kept few, but the one that is very much pronounced on its variegation do not grow so well, as they do require heavy feeding, and I have not really cared for it properly. We can actually notice it. There's some kind of tiny spots kind of stuff like that. So this is a different type. Anyway, it's alive, and I'm actually happy about it because actually the green version is very much easier to grow. Now you will notice that this is actually on a clay pot, and most of my medium which actually grow is actually in the mix of sand. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is through experience, I find that any medium that is very much filled with cocoa peat seems to rot away easily. So this is a different version of it. I'm actually able to keep it alive, and that is my first foundation of growing plants, is to keep them alive first. So if they are alive and and the other step is more of getting them to thrive in my garden. So in a context of how I grow them is that, especially in a tight garden space, I would like to have colored plants. But of course, most variegated plants do not really survive in my garden condition. So therefore I just try to find the one that is hardy, and so therefore these fall into those category. Now, if you notice over here that I've actually put a cup into this particular philodendron plant. Earlier is actually there was no cup there, and I actually left it as such as that. And the problem was it was actually very dry, and I know by doing this it actually helps to regulate enough moisture for the plant to survive. Now when it comes to philodendron, especially those of the aroid types, like the philodendron photos or even syngoniums, this kind of method actually helps a lot, especially when it comes to challenging gardeners such as mine, like myself, where I really do not have time to water them. So this particular technique actually help them. And we notice this is actually quite spent, and you can see the leaves are not everywhere and just in the ground. It's not because it has been not properly watered for weeks, or if at all I only have once a week to water it, and sometimes the the watering is just not sufficient and I just haphazardly spray everywhere. So in that kind of context, this actually helps. Now, coming back to the factor where, if at all, that if your garden is too wet, then I would actually suggest to use more on a fast draining factor of medium, such as leca ball or perlite, and I find that it actually helps. And yet, of course, you can actually see a lot of seasoned gardeners will use that, and however I try not to purchase it because they are actually expensive, and in where I come from, a little bit of it really costs a lot, so saving a lot of that, or trying to find any other innovative ways to go about it. And I find that something like reverse sand seems to have a very good substitute for those um, planting materials, especially when it comes to perlite or even moss, the spectrum moss, and all the kind of stuff. It is actually expensive. This particular one is a tiny one here. If you notice, it's actually a zigzag plant. ZZ plant. I actually planted a small bulb there, and so it's managed to grow. So there are elements here that I find that is quite unique and interesting. Now, coming back to this particular portion of all these anthurium seedlings, I've actually made an extensive video on how to actually crossbreed them, and how I actually started from flower and get them from a male factor to a female inflorescent. Especially, actually, this particular one you don't call a flower, it's actually a inflorescent, and so therefore the supposed flower, and with the berries, it almost took me about 6 months for the whole process to take place. And even that, after the propagation and the berries to sprout out, and there were a lot of casualties out of that, and these are supposed the end result of it after 6 months. So I must say that I have not really taken care of them properly, and therefore it sort of like didn't really work out. But anyway, this is the results of it. And also, I've also placed phytonias here, and I find that they are doing well. Actually, I purchased it to do some terrariums, and the trick here is to constantly trim them and repropagate it back, so that they are constantly regenerating. Do not let them to become mature, and if they become very leggy and mature, the stem seems to succumb to sort of like finish its lifespan, and they seems to die. Of course, different gardeners have their own style of doing it, but I find, by through my experiences, keeping them small and short actually expands their lifespan. So what I normally supposed to do here is that with these, I'm supposed to cut them, replant them, and actually planning to use that for my terrarium, which actually was successful. Is that something went wrong in the midst of it? I believe it's a wrong mixture of medium that I use. I think I used too strong a compost in it, and that supposedly started to rot the plants. I think it's too wet, or all that kind of very small, minute factors actually play a very big role when it comes to terrarium. So this is the supposed terrarium that I have, I actually have kept aside. I really had to work on it because it takes a lot of time to really sit down and work at it. But I found the composition or the, what do you call that, the medium that it works best with sand. But the plant, of course, it's still alive. It's just that I have to cut it and redo it again. I'll come to one of the videos on that, and I give more a clearer and more detailed video on terrarium. But I find that this particular one, especially the Phytonias, is actually meant for that. Also, this is a Pelonia. It's actually supposed to be watermelon begonia, trailing watermelon begonia, but it's a different version. And I managed to find different types of it. So yeah, actually it's supposed to be more on the context of terrarium plants, but somehow these are doing well. Are all the seedlings, so I'm just observing it, and after this time frame, I'm just hoping that it will just grow very well instead of succumb, to rot or something like that. I must say that initially this whole area here actually was growing all the cane begonias, but I think I will come to that later. But for now, in this particular video, I want to talk a little bit of it. So this actually was neglected, and I think the snails or slug have really did a bad job on it, and I didn't really pay attention, and I got all the damages that had taken place on those leaves. Now over here is actually a Salingelina. I find that this particular one, Plana if I'm not wrong, Plana, and I find that this particular type of Salingelina seems to be very hardy and easy and robust and uh, able to handle. So I might also use this for my terrarium. So it's quite a bush, but in that context I actually lost other species on Slengelina. So yeah, these are the things that I want to mention when it comes to my experimentals and experiences on this. And I find that when it comes to garden, it constantly changes. So one of the tips that I want to explain to you here is that in the context like me, when you lack of time, so I'm starting to get into a discipline of working at it maybe once a week, or maybe like whenever the time is available, 30 minutes a day, something like that, just to sort of give a therapeutic experience. Now I've actually placed this colocasia here, and being colocasia, I realized that they are somehow aquatic and actually more on the factor where lacking which they can actually shrivel, especially those bulb or tuber, whichever they call it. They can actually shrink and die away. And somehow I managed to keep these alive. Of course, because of the water filtering thing and the cascading effect of the water, this particular one seems to doing fine. Of course, if they are heavily fat, these particular ones would have become more on a giant size. My intention is just to keep them alive, because it's a big deal for me keeping plants alive. Where I am, most of the plants are not easily available. Now coming back, I'll actually will add in a historic factor of past videos of how this particular place have been evolving, and I find that it's quite interesting because along the way, especially when it comes to experiments, you somehow find that it's interesting that plants do adapt very well when it comes to water. And so therefore I find that when it comes to photos, philodendron, or even aglonema seems to do fine even in the aquatic environment. And I find that this particular one, the bilitale, uh, still affordable now. Way back then, I think it would have cost a bomb, but this particular one is a green version. So sort of like I find that when it comes to philodendron, actually grow them more in the context where their appearance, their texture, the colorization, the pattern. I find that is much more interesting. I find that now, when it was a rare plant, these things were actually grown on the factor where it actually goes together with trending plants, followed by an element where a lot of people would have invested this on a financial factor, or only then to find that a lot of this are now facing what do you call that, price crashed, and in a way sense that a lot of them actually went into a disheartening mode, thinking that they would be able to win back their profit margin or even their capital. So these are things that you have to watch out for, that in growing plants, that when it comes to rare plants, these are the things that they call come under trending factors. But the other ones that I've actually managed to collect, Lacerum, the other one was Dragon, and this is Dragon Tail and Cebu. So somehow I find that this is something that I enjoy growing, so therefore I don't really feel the pinch when there was a price drop, because I did not purchase them when they were in their premium prices. Of course, most of these plants are very much cheap and affordable, but I can say that some of them, even though they are cheap, they are quite challenging, especially this particular one, Photos Manjula. I'm still finding it tough time to grow them. So yeah, in a way, I don't gauge plants based on their price rather than their difficulty to manage and care for them. Another factor is their variegated types, and of course, again, they are still in their premium prices, as in most of them are. But another factor of it is that because they are, a lot of it actually flooded the market, and so the price is sort of like half the price. So I think this particular species, it's still expensive, but the other ones, I think most of the other types, especially the Burmax and all that, I think the price has crashed. Now coming back to the other collection here, this particular one was actually sort of like overwhelmed and overgrown, and actually I rearranged it and set it yesterday. Hope that it'll pick up properly, and I'm still working on it. You can actually look at the earlier videos or the older videos that I might able to show you how it looks like in the the beauty factor of it. Of course, a lot of maintenance is required of repotting. I hope that this one works out. So yeah, coming back to that, garden work was never complete. So do keep in mind that it is always progressive. The garden work will never end. Most gardeners will tell you that. I used to have a lot of goldfish then, but somehow a lot of them actually have very short lifestyle. So actually switched to carps, and I think there seems to have a long lifespan. And it also have managed to introduce some aquatic plants, and find that because lack of sunlight, especially when it comes to aquatic plants, they do require a very strong direct light. But somehow this managed to survive. So I'm just keeping them for now. So this very much concludes the pond plants that I've actually managed to reset according to my mood and my interests, and so therefore this sets it up. I must say that very much earlier, this area here, I have actually planted a lot of my begonias here. However, coming to begonias, I also find that they are high maintenance plants, and a lot of it did not survive. And I think these are still making it happen. And I find that the other factor here is that uh, coming to that idea, I find that when I hang most of the begonias, this seems to do better. Of course, the watering issue seems to be an issue, but there seems to be okay with lack of water than more of overwatering. Now we can actually see here this particular one actually is very much spent because of lack of water. Just bring it down for a clearer view. And you can see here is that they not really looking so well because of lacking of water. But however, my intention is to experiment and see how it actually goes. So you can see the burnt leaf or more of the faded colors. These are the things that I know by experience. I know these are actually lacking water. So what I'm going to do here shortly, I'm going to water it, and hopefully it actually picks up. I just want to show to you this cascading effect of this particular begonia pot. I have actually poured water and I kept it like standing in the water for few hours, and I find the whole thing perked up and look more healthy looking. And I find that that's the balance when it comes to begonias, especially cane begonias. It's meant to be strong, but overwatering can actually cause them to suffer. Now this is the rearrangement of my collection, where I actually place my air plants and Huprisia here. One other thing here, I used to have a lot more, but I think a lot of it perished due to my negligence. And I think the factor here is because too much rain can actually cause them to rot, and too much sun can dry them up. So they do require a good source of bright light. Due to the factor of too much watering can cause them to rot. One of the things that I found, that also identifying the type of species, because the ones that is a highland type require a high humidity factor, which is not very good in the tropical zone. Coming to the next one, are these Hupirisia species. I will actually do another video. All my older videos, I've actually covered extensive information on them, on how to care for them. This particular one actually facing a factor where it's actually my part of negligence, where I really didn't care for them. Maybe it was receiving too much rainwater and the whole thing actually collapsed in a sense of rot. And the other factor here is that because of these are very challenging plants and you cannot actually predict them, so care is required in a sense that the balance of watering and enough factor where they actually drain out easily, so that it will not collect water too much that the root ball rots away. I would say that this is sort of like regenerating back, and so how I managed to revive it, because if I were to kept it in a place where it was still shady, I think this particular plant would have actually perished. So these are things that I find that when it comes to tight neat spaces, I find that less is more, and I'm just keeping with this because I realized that the temptation of buying more plants and placing in the, and it sort of like tighten up the whole place, and a lot of these plants may go into a sense of competition, and one may overwhelm the other, and the whole plant may perish because of lacking of sunlight. So these are things that I want to make mention of on my factor of gardening in this moment of time. I just brought this particular pot down for a better viewing factor, because I just want to highlight how it appears to be. And one of the main tips that I want to mention here is that in an earlier factor of one of the experiences, I always kept my begonias tall by sticking them, and I find that when it comes to begonias, especially cane begonias, I was not able to see the rot factor, especially like when I see over here, it looks okay, but the rot takes place at the stem, at the edge of it, and they do have sort of like a succulent kind of effect, where the whole plant will actually sort of dying, but you can't see it until the last moment. So keeping them short, especially like this, sort of like stunted in a way to like constantly treat them and keeping them in that kind of factor seems to keep this particular begonias alive. And my idea here is to keep it short and sweet, and just to keep it bushy and tight, and so therefore I'm able to keep the species going in a long-term basis. Now coming back to this particular portion is actually a pond, a water pot. Then I actually place all this supposed begonias here. It's actually constantly evolving. I wouldn't really have managed to able to say earlier. My experiment was to do something like a mop wick system, but I find that it's not really working out, so I'm actually placing them into the spots. So anyway, I come to the end of my video. If you have any questions, do put them in a comment below, and thank you so much for supporting me over all this time, and really appreciate if you can click like and support and subscribe my channel. And I really like to hear from you on your thoughts about how I manage and care for my garden, and like to hear from you on your thoughts about my gardening experience, and share your thoughts on your experiences of what do you face when on a challenging moment of lacking time or a change of lifestyle, like myself, where you would really like to garden and yet not having the time to do so. So catch you in my next video. Have a nice day. I'm actually including the older videos on this portion of space, and hope it sounds very therapeutic in a way, where the sound of water with the music may actually help you, or if at all you enjoy that kind of scenery sound and effect. Anyway, thank you, and catch you again in my next video. Take care. Bye.